impeachment moves into the Senate with antics aplenty, but few surprises. Ed Blakely and myself, Sean Ritten, discussing the latest in US news and politics. Hey, if you enjoy what you hear, drop us a review wherever you find the podcast, or check us out on Facebook and Twitter at US of Ed. Donald Trump's impeachment has now, as we mentioned last week, moved into the Senate for trial. Any new twists, Ed?
Well, there are a couple of new twists. The first is McConnell had to back down, and the evidence from the, the impeachment will go over to the Senate. He was blocking that, and they'll go over 3 days for entry arguments rather than 2 days. He didn't want any evidence there. He wanted to go a very short time and then move for dismissal. That was the ploy. But apparently he didn't have the votes for that, so he's come up with this. The Democrats, of course, have lost on every attempt to get any changes in these rules other than the ones he's put forward. But I think something's coming.
Just to underline, I think, a little bit how farcical this is in terms of the Republican response. I mean, Republicans are between Donald Trump did nothing wrong, Trump did something wrong, but it's not impeachable, claiming you need proof of an illegal action in order to impeach a president, which you know is not in fact true. To underline this, one of the charges against Trump is withholding evidence and obstruction. Now, he's come forward in Davos to actually boast, honestly, we have all the material, they don't have the material. This is essentially a confession. It is surreal.
But he's confessed to everything already, has he not? With the first telephone call, the report that he gave out, the transcript, showed that he did it. And everything else has shown that. What he is trying to do is to get this through very fast, the American people not concentrating on it, and then he can say, as he goes in the election, I was exonerated. What he didn't count on, though, is by holding out this evidence, the Democrats would use it in their favor by calling up each witness and asking that person be voted on. The American people now know who the witnesses are. By making these wild statements about not withholding evidence, the Democrats have been able to list out all the evidence that they're asking for that's being withheld. So the Democrats are getting the game. It's like he's playing a tennis game in the back court, and the Democrats are just lobbing it over the net and beating him on every stroke. The other thing he's done, from my point of view, is put himself on the back foot with the American people. There are a few things the American people generally believe in, like Australians. One of them is the fair go. And Americans believe in the jury system and the trial. So no American can understand how you're going to have a trial without a jury, and without the jury being impartial, and without evidence. And the more he does this, the deeper the hole. And you can see it in the polls. He started out 50% of the people against him. Now there are 70% of the people against him on the trial. And the numbers are going up for removal. So this is a Pyrrhic victory. What he should have done is what I call the O.J. Simpson approach. Don't say you did it, but if the glove don't fit, must not be you. So he could have allowed a lot of evidence in and so forth and say, hey, look, the glove doesn't fit. I didn't do this exactly the way you said. He gets exonerated. The American people said he had a fair trial and he got away. The American people were really ticked off on the O.J. Simpson matter, but nobody thought the judge, the jury, or the trial was a mockery. So I think he's pushed himself into a corner here, a very difficult corner from which he cannot get out.
I would love to see this end with Donald Trump fleeing Washington in a white Bronco. That would be a hell of a thing to see.
Yeah, I can see it all now, but of course it'd be an aircraft and there'd be fighter planes behind it, right?
Exactly right, mate.
Going to Florida.
You mentioned, of course, the witnesses. Now, John Bolton has been the one that you've kind of really underlined as we're waiting to see. Bated breath to see what will happen with John Bolton. Reportedly, there was a deal offered of a swap. John Bolton for Hunter Biden, get them both up in front of the Senate to testify. What do you make of this one?
Well, I think the Democrats would say fine. But when the Democrats said fine, oh, well, we didn't mean it like that. We wanted to limit his testimony and so on and so on. He can't say things that he had to say to the president. You know, clearly that's against the rules. Well, what about Hunter Biden? He shouldn't say anything about Burisma. He doesn't know anything. Well, that's different. So they can't lose for losing.
And just before I let this one go, wanted to read you this quote from Adam Schiff, who's obviously one of the main names here. The president's misconduct cannot be decided at the ballot box, for we cannot be assured that the vote will be fairly won. What do you make of that one? I mean, that's kind of been the fallback. Remove him at the ballot box, if not through the Senate. But what do you make of that one from Schiff?
Well, I think he's making a statement here that has two prongs. One of them is this guy might try to get a lot of people off the voting rolls, and that's going on now. The second one is he might not accept defeat. So get ready for this. The man can't be trusted. He's going to stay in as long as he can, because remember, when he goes, New York's going to come after him. The fact that he moved to Florida just makes it easier for the New Yorkers to go wild after him. No, I think what Donald Trump is doing and is coming back from Davos is another signal of this. He's trying to run it all himself. He's come back from Davos because it's not going well. He thinks if he comes back, it'll go well. What will he do? He'll have a few more rallies where he thinks that people will come to his defense, right? He will try to tell his people what to say when they are before the Senate. And all this will leak out, of course. There is no place that's a secret in the White House or in Washington. So if he tries to win on his own, he might lose. Interestingly enough, there have been a few people appearing in the background in his speeches, and now I think it's a thing. Let me get in the background and start shaking my head and so on and making a mockery of it. His talks are now being made a mockery of. The other thing, stop to think of it. Every time he does one of these things, he gets some little old lady who wasn't paying much attention to this saying, where can I sign up so I can walk the streets against Trump? Adam Schiff is almost as wily as Nancy.
Speaking of Davos, first big issue out of the way there, climate change.
There isn't any.
Well, that's exactly it. We shouldn't listen to prophets of doom, according to Mr. Trump. Look, even here in this country, conservatives are realising the game is up on climate denialism. Why? Trump could ignore this one. He could let it go by the sidelines. Why is it still such a key issue for him to be first and foremost on denial?
Well, there are two reasons for this. The first is he wants to say jobs are connected with climate change. And his blocking all this climate change is leading to more and more jobs for his people. So he wants to make that statement. Of course, it's phony, but he wants to make it. And so let him. The second reason is that big oil, all these interest groups, have no home with climate change. Until they change their ways significantly, there's no place for them to go, and they have to come to Trump.
Trump has also used Davos to repeat threats of tariffs on European car imports if he can't reach a better deal with the EU, saying ultimately it will be very easy because if we can't make a deal, we'll have to put 25% tariffs on their cars. This sounds very familiar, Ed.
Very, very familiar. That means the Japanese will be delighted because they'll sell more cars in the United States. Look, most of the cars they sell are luxury cars. Is 25% going to make that big a difference on your Merc? Who knows? It's written off your taxes anyway, and the tax refund you got is big enough to cover it. I don't think the Europeans are going to back down at all. You know who this really hurts? The Brits. Because the things the Brits would be sending over, and the rover, although it's a Chinese or Japanese firm, would be coming from Great Britain and going through Europe. So get real.
Some incredible scenes in Virginia this week as some 22,000 people turned up to protest gun control laws recently passed by the Virginia State Senate. Many openly carrying full arsenals of weapons, dressed up like they wanted to play at being soldiers. Unsurprisingly, those with links to Proud Boys and other right-wing white supremacist groups mixing in. A few Confederate flags on show. All ended peacefully, though. Ed, any thoughts on this one?
Well, a couple things. Virginia was prepared this time. The other thing is they did what they should have done last time. Arrest the bad guys before they could get anything started. So all these guys have warrants out for them for anything, carrying concealed weapons, for driving their car with liquor in it, whatever. They collected all these warrants up, and as soon as those guys appeared, they put them in jail. So they cut the head off this snake, and the snake couldn't rattle.
I mean, personally, I'm of the belief if you have 10 people sitting at a table with one Nazi, you've probably got a table with 11 Nazis. You are judged by the company you keep. One of the most significant arrests before this rally was 3 members of a neo-Nazi group, goes by the name of The Base. Allegedly, they wanted to attempt a false flag operation, hoping to set off a shooting that they could then blame on leftists.
Yes.
I mean, it's not criminal geniuses, but still very, very dangerous people in America at the moment.
Yeah, they're there. And either they or the Iranians are going to be successful at this. It's an old trick. You know, we played this back when I was a kid, you know, how us Indians could ambush the white guys. So it's an old trick, and I think it's going to be on display because the people don't have huge genius going on, but they got mimicry. So it's going to happen, I'm afraid.
In the Democratic race, the New York Times have endorsed or co-endorsed this week Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar for president. Now, I guess this sends the message, just not another old white bloke. Any thoughts?
Well, maybe they could put them together. I don't know who. Let's give Amy the head and the bottom part. I think they were dodging the bullet here. Clearly, Biden has not shown very much. He hasn't hit his stride. He's kind of the candidate of least resistance, as it were, but not a candidate that's exciting. Amy Klobuchar is going to be there. She might be vice president. She might even be president. I don't think Elizabeth Warren is going to be there. And the Times took a calculated risk here. Elizabeth Warren, some of the things she's talking about are things that the Times has talked about in the past, particularly in healthcare and wealth taxes.
And just speaking of Biden, of course, this week, I'm speaking of Bernie, I should say, and Biden this week. Bernie Sanders surging again in the polls, but now trading barbs with frontrunner Joe Biden. Now, firstly, a surrogate of Sanders wrote an op-ed calling Biden corrupt, and despite apologising for that one, Sanders has then tweeted a video with the caption, "Let's be honest, Joe, one of us fought for decades to cut Social Security and one of us didn't." Again, this is getting to
dishonest.
Be ugly.
It's ugly, but it's dishonest. That clip was Joe Biden mimicking somebody who wanted to cut Social Security, not him asking to cut it. So I think it's going to get a little bit ugly here. The American people don't need any more ugliness. I hope they get their senses. Let's face it, Bernie is not going to be president of the United States. I hope.
And finally, Martin Luther King Jr. Day this week. Ed, we've spoken before about you meeting King, marching alongside him. So I'd like to take this opportunity each year to kind of reflect, I think, on the lessons of King, the lessons of the civil rights movement. Any reflections this year in 2020?
I think the biggest reflection is King was a supporter of the law. All of his things were done lawfully because he was a Gandhi protege or advocate or whatever you might call him, disciple. And he felt the law was the best thing, the best refuge for Black Americans. In some ways, it has been, in terms of affirmative action and other things. In other ways, cops are still beating up Black kids. There's still huge disparities in the prisons. So I think now's the time to reflect on the true message. How's the law used positively and not negatively?
US of Ed is produced in the studios of 2SER in Sydney. Help support the work we do by going to 2ser.com/support. Ed and I will be back next week, most likely with the Senate trial's conclusion. Check us out wherever you find the podcast. Subscribe, drop us a review, and you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at US of Ed.